Cycles. Nature is the best recycler. It constantly reuses different nutrients by cycling them through different parts of the environment. Remember the water cycle? Okay, we have precipitation, that rain accumulates. Warm air causes evaporation, which condensates, right, or condenses back into precipitation. Okay, there's also transpiration into condensation and precipitation, right? So the point here is that we have water going through a cycle. Okay, quick, think. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. What are these three? What do they do? Okay, all three of these elements are important nutrients in our environment that contribute to life and to growth. I want you to watch this video about the importance of nutrients for this particular animal. So the carbon cycle. Carbon composes some part of every living thing. Carbon moves from the air to plants. Okay, so we have from the air, it moves to plants. So we have atmospheric carbon dioxide moves to the plants. Okay, which moves to, let's say there's an apple that falls from the tree. This little bunny eats it, goes to the animal, right? The animal breathes out, right? We have an animal here, respiration, breathes out carbon dioxide. And it also goes to, if they die, back into the ground. Okay. But wait, there's more. This is the diagram that I want you to, essentially I want you to memorize this for the exam and for the test. Okay. So we have atmospheric carbon dioxide. Plants use that through photosynthesis, right, to make oxygen, right, which animals breathe in and respirate out carbon dioxide. Sometimes they die. Their remains, as well as plants, is decomposed by fungi and bacteria that also return that carbon via respiration back into the atmosphere, and it all happens over again. Greenhouse gases. Okay, are gases in the atmosphere that prevent heat from leaving it. These are things like water vapor, carbon dioxide, and methane. Okay, the greenhouse effect is the effect that greenhouse gases, okay, water vapor, carbon dioxide, and methane, have on the increase in temperature in the atmosphere. Energy or heat that would have left the earth is trapped, causing it to warm the earth. That's when we're talking about the earth, the warming up as a result of greenhouse gases or excess carbon in the atmosphere, right? Or methane or water vapor. This is the greenhouse effect from those greenhouse gases. So the oxygen cycle is closely related to the carbon cycle. Photosynthesis creates oxygen as air, and respiration and body functions turn the oxygen into carbon dioxide. Almost all living things require oxygen for life. Some bacteria don't. So it's kind of important. Oxygen moves between the atmosphere, the biosphere, this is where we live, and the hydrosphere, that's water, water stuff, and the lithosphere, that's under the earth, through different processes, just like the carbon cycle and the water cycle and, the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is another important element that is important to life on Earth. Okay, it's an essential part of our DNA and all proteins. The majority of the air we breathe is actually nitrogen, but as N2, right? It just means two nitrogens, which isn't useful to our bodies. So how do we get what we need? Nitrogen mostly moves from the atmosphere to the ground through nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So we have nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in the legume root nodules. Okay, so this is where primarily that's nitrogen fixation also occurs through some natural events such as lightning strikes, forest fires, and lava flows. There's a way to do this in a lab, okay, to create usable fertilizer or nitrogen for fertilizer. Okay, so that's what I've got right here. Once the nitrogen has been changed to its usable form, it's taken up by different processes. So plants take it for growth, and then animals eat the plants and process it, right? So we got this little bunny. Bunny eats the plant, gets the nitrogen. Okay, I don't know why it's always a bunny. Some nitrogen stays in the soil, however, and eventually makes its way back out into the air. And so that's where we have, okay, we have these nitrogen-fixing bacteria, right? And then here, denitrifying bacteria send it back into the air. How do humans affect the nitrogen cycle? Through the soil is one way. Nitrogen pollution. So some nitrogen in the soil gets washed out into waterways, which can cause many issues. So if you take a look here at the situation, we've got a farmer who's fertilizing his field, right? He's spraying the fertilizers on top, okay? And what happens is when it rains or we have snow and then it melts, it washes off into waterways, okay? And it causes a lot of issues we're going to talk about. Nitrogen pollution also takes place in the air. When we burn fossil fuels, they release nitrogen oxides into the atmosphere. This contributes to smog and acid rain formation, which can be harmful to plants and to us. For nitrogen's effects on biodiversity and water, see eutrophication. We'll come to that soon. Okay, humans play a large role in the dynamics of cycles. We add chemicals into our ecosystems for things like agriculture, aesthetics, right? So to make our landscaping, making a pretty yard, and industry, right? Factories and such. These excess chemicals play a role in the cycle of nutrients. Back to the basics. Okay, so remember, energy, nutrients, and toxins can move through a food web or a food chain from producers to consumers. Okay, here's a way nitrogen affects biodiversity and water. Eutrophication. Okay, eutrophication is a process in which nutrient levels in an aquatic ecosystem increase, leading to an increase in the populations of primary producers. So here's a little picture here. We've got runoff, right? A fertilizer runoff from farmland into the water. That's just one way that it happens, right? And that causes something. So that's number one. Okay, and that causes something called an algal bloom. So you can see that green stuff at the top of the water. Okay. Number three, submerged plants die due to reduced light. So these plants that were giving oxygen to the water, right, they start to die due to the fact that there's reduced light because there is too much algae in the water. Number four, algae and other plants die. Okay, so we have other plants that are dying, the algae is starting to die, it all floats down to the bottom. Number five, okay, bacteria use oxygen during decomposition, right? Did we learn that in before about decomposition, cycling of carbon, right? And so bacteria use oxygen during decomposition. That takes oxygen out of the water, right? Who uses the water? Well, the fish do, right? And the fish breathe in the water, and that's where they get their oxygen from. So oxygen levels in the water drop too low for fish to survive. So it's a slow depletion, right, and destruction of the ecosystem. So eutrophication is a huge problem in Lake Winnipeg today. Lake Winnipeg is this spot right here. Okay, you can see here's Manitoba. This right here, this thing, you can see that what looks like water. This is the Rocky Mountains over here. So this is Alberta. This is Saskatchewan, right? Manitoba, Ontario, and then we have Minnesota and South Dakota down here. There's a number, so all of that, this is what's called a watershed. All the water from these areas, you can imagine all the agricultural land all the way around here, okay, all dumps back into Lake Winnipeg, okay, which has caused the issue that we have in Lake Winnipeg with algal blooms today. Bioaccumulation, different than eutrophication. Okay, bioaccumulation is a process by which toxins and other materials are ingested by organisms at rates greater than that which they are able to be eliminated. Okay, so my example here, let's say we have mercury leached into the lake, right? It goes into the lake and is absorbed by plants, and then we have these phytoplankton, and then they're feeding on the plants, and then these little guys, they feed on these little guys, and these guys feed on these little guys too, and then these smelt, they eat these guys, and then the smelt are eaten by the lake trout, and then the lake trout is eaten by the herring gull. And the point here is that every time, these little guys, they take in only so much of the mercury or whatever toxin it is, but every time these guys will eat a lot of these guys, right? And these guys will eat more of these guys. And so you can see the number: 200 times, 45,000 times, right? 835,000 times, 2.8 million times, 25 million times, right? So the amount of toxins at the end of the food chain is where they are the highest. So which part of the food chain is most affected by this ingestion? Okay. Think of the food chain words: processors, consumers. Okay, so which consumer? It'd be the consumer at the top of the food chain, right? That tertiary consumer, the one that eats everybody else, that will get the most toxins.